Welcome to the Family Banking Show with your hosts Rob, Derek, and John, where we dive into the world of the infinite banking concept and discuss personal banking strategies to secure your legacy and build generational wealth. We're glad you're here, and we hope this episode serves you well.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Family Banking Show. I'm your host, Derek Gruning, and I'm joined by two wonderful co-hosts, Rob and John. How's it going, gentlemen?
Great.
It's going well.
Good. Well, this week we're going to be talking about Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker. We're going to be looking in at page 14 of the book and specifically looking at imagination, reason, logic, and prophecy. And guys, as we've talked about beforehand, before we started recording, I think imagination is one that really is one that people can grab hold of, especially in the realm of IBC or infinite banking. But when it comes to reason, logic, and prophecy, what are your guys' thoughts as to what did Nelson mean by it, and how is it applicable to IBC and just the way we manage our personal finances?
Yeah, I think absolutely imagination is pretty easy to conceptualize in the infinite banking concept context. You can see where that takes you. But the way I kind of took the rest of that first sentence on page 14 of Becoming Your Own Banker is equating it to wisdom and knowing Nelson Nash's very, very deep-rooted Christian faith. I definitely think he would agree in equating the reason, the logic, and the prophecy aspects of this page to wisdom. And I think he absolutely directs us to finding wisdom, having the humility to seek wisdom. You know, in the page just before, he talks about discovering IBC, right? And he's on his knees praying, asking God for wisdom. And how to get out of the rut that he was in at that time. And James talks about in the New Testament of the Bible that if you desire wisdom, ask God for it, and he will give it to you. And so I think that's definitely what manifested in his life and what resulted in this amazing book and this amazing concept that we get the joy to talk about right now. And I definitely think those keywords of reason, logic, and prophecy relate to that. And, you know, those who don't want wisdom, the Bible calls fools. You know, fools despise wisdom. So there's definitely the camp that I want to be in is those who seek wisdom, those who are humble enough to admit, maybe I don't know everything. Maybe there's something else out there worth exploring and worth understanding. That could change my life. And that's exactly what happened, at least for me, with IBC.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely. You know, in terms of the imagination piece, I mean, there's so many ways, directions we could go with that. But I think it basically just means thinking differently than the world. You know, we're told a message of, send our money to be, give it to the bankers, give it to the money managers, give it to the qualified plans, give it to everybody else so that they can control it. And I think, imagine, your life doing it, banking on yourself, banking with yourself, banking with your family bank. Just imagine what that would be like, because we're also used to just the message we're being bombarded with constantly of, send us your money, we will manage it for you, we'll take care of you. That's one of the things I really love about the infinite banking concept or becoming your own banker with dividend paying whole life is you can break free from the banking system and you start managing the bank for your family, controlling, where your money goes and when you use it, when you don't use it. So yeah, that's just think differently, I think is the key there.
Yeah, Nelson's famous for saying, rethink your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's absolutely requires a shift in your mindset of just, you've been indoctrinated with personal finances, putting money in your 401k and taking it automatically out of your paycheck every week or every other week. That's just been so ingrained in the general public's perception as to what they ought to do with their money that it's difficult for people to consider something slightly different, just one change, where that money goes first before it ends up potentially in your 401k or IRA. The gentleman, Nelson writes on page 17 of the book where he's explaining the problem with people's personal finances. And he says that the problem is that all these items, he's referring to automobiles, he's referring to housing, he's referring to living expenses. He's saying all these items, the problem with them is that they are financed by other banking organizations. And just today I was listening to another podcast, another one focused in on teaching the infinite banking concept. And the host of that podcast made an interesting point. They said that the average American consumer is going to own 13 vehicles over their lifetime.
Wow.
Per driver.
I
So
believe it.
consider your family, just you and your spouse. Now consider all your children and their spouses and potentially grandchildren. How many vehicles is the Gruning family going to have over the course of my lifetime? Per driver. Well, 13 per driver, but how many in total? And then consider the amount of interest that is being paid and just the cash flow in general that's being paid out to other banks that you don't own, other financing institutions that you are not at least a part owner of. This is where reason and logic needs to come into play, and a little bit of imagination. Shift that thinking, realize that I can create a system for myself and for my family to now we're able to recapture those dollars that would have been going and leaving our personal economy. Now it's coming back to our personal economy and growing wealth for either yourself or for your entire family, and creating truly a lasting legacy at that point.
Yeah, and another aspect of reason when talking about commercial banks is we all know that the skyscrapers in downtown, we live in Minneapolis area, there's a huge bank that has a huge skyscraper, and even our football stadium is named after that same bank for the Vikings. And it's no wonder, that they are the ones profiting off of us, off of everyday Americans,
Yeah.
using these car loans, these 13 per driver over their lifetime, over generations. And that couples nicely with imagination to where you can just think, can I possibly replace that? Can I control that and make the same profit, if not more, than what those skyscraper banks are every day getting from everyday Americans?
Yeah, I mean, even if you're not profiting more than those other banks, let's just say you're improving your financial environment by 2%. Like, why would you not want to do that? Even just a small little change, 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever it is, doesn't matter. You're performing better than you would have been otherwise. It's just, it seems like it's a no-brainer to me. I wish more people would understand that. Just this quick shift in thinking, realizing that you can actually create a system that acts and functions like a bank. And now you're able to recapture those expenses, that the cash flow that was going out is now coming back.
Yeah, I mean, that's the importance of podcasts like this is educating people. Like, people just don't know. I didn't know that was possible, until 2018.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was even I didn't even know that was an option, that I could, if I had the patience and the discipline to build up my own bank in a mutual, dividend paying whole life policy, that I could then start to just become my own banker and start to take advantage of basically all the profit that the bank is getting off of you. Well, that goes back to you through the dividends that you get in your insurance policy.
Yeah.
And you control the terms, you control the payback schedule. If something happens in life, you can pause the payback schedule until things get back to normal. You have total control. And while you have total control, your policy is continually growing uninterrupted. So that's just like a paradigm shift that people just aren't aware of it. So that's what the Family Banking Show is all about.
Before we switch gears to focus on solely just imagination, think about the term prophecy again. And as you both know, and hopefully our audience is starting to catch up to speed, one of the phrases that Nelson Nash is famous for saying is, if you know what's going on, you'll know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to this activity of prophecy? And how, just in general, does prophecy and IBC go hand in hand?
Yeah, I think one little disclaimer I'll say is IBC is wonderful. Nelson Nash was a really wise man who gave us an amazing book to continue to reference back to. But he is not a prophet. He is not a biblical prophet. He is not Elijah hearing directly from God that this is now the Christian way to manage your finances. So the disclaimer I want to just put out there is this is just, in our opinion, the best way to steward your finances, to leave a legacy, to solve for all those banking problems that we're talking about over the life of this podcast. But by no means is there, a moral obligation or even sin for not doing this. So I do want to put that out there that, you can be free to explore this without that obligation or weight associated. But back to the comment about if you know what's going on, you'll know what to do, and understanding that, especially in prophecy is pretty simply just prediction or just like a forecasting of the future. You can forecast the future because it's in the contract. Like the contract is just so plain and easy for the consumer or the policy owner to understand that it's guaranteed, that this left-hand column of the illustration is guaranteed, and contractually that the life insurance company has to uphold that their end of the bargain there. So I think that relates absolutely to prophecy and being able to certainly forecast the future in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's just another component that I don't think our listeners, and many of our listeners might not be aware of, but it's a contract between you and the life insurance company, private contract, and it's unilateral. You, the policy owner, have all the control. The obligation is on the insurance company. So as long as you pay your premiums, the insurance company has to honor the contract. So it's guaranteed that your values will go, your death benefit will go up every year, your cash value will go up every year. And so that is, that's like you said, you can forecast it then. You can see what's going to happen. And that's a powerful tool when you're not tied to the stock market. You don't go up and down with the fluctuations of the stock market. I'd say you pace inflation. If inflation goes up, you get the dividend scales change. If inflation goes down, dividend scales change. So you're always kind of pacing inflation. So yeah, you can really it's this real predictable tool to utilize. So that's why it's so powerful.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing both you talk about is the importance of having guarantees in life, in particular of how that impacts your personal finances. Well, one thing I think about prophecy, and I think about future unknowns, future risks. One, for example, would be the tax rate. Our personal income tax is going to increase in the next 10, 20, 15, 50 years. Mm-hmm. We have no idea. We can speculate, but what we can do today is find a solution for a known problem and a known result. We know we're going to die. Unless Jesus comes back, we know we're going to die. And we know that our family is going to maybe relying on you as a potential income source in your family, right? My wife is, my kids are. So I want to protect my family of a future known event. We just don't know when I'm going to die. But it's a known, it's concrete, it's sure, it's steadfast. The fact that it's very plain Jane that everyone is going to die unless Jesus returns. But there are other risks in life that we don't know. For example, taxes. We don't know if whole life insurance is going to maintain the preferential tax treatment that it has today. But we have to do something. Our money has to reside somewhere. So we're choosing to use whole life insurance contract, because it's got those guarantees, because we're hedging against potential inflation, because we're hedging against future unknowns, we're trying to take back that control. And this is the great way of doing it.
Right.
Guys, let's talk about imagination for a bit. As we had mentioned before we started recording, I think we've already touched on a few of the points that I wanted to share, but just simply imagine, listener, imagine what your life or your family's life would be like if you just started your own personal banking system. And as we've talked about, a great illustration or example of that would be, imagine what your family's financial situation would be like if you were able to capture the financing of 13, 26, 39 vehicles throughout your lifetime. Instead of that money going off, it's now coming back to your family's economy. Guys, what are some other things that you would suggest our listeners consider when it comes to imagination?
Well, I think the quote at the very top of the page in Becoming Your Own Banker by Albert Einstein, it says, imagination is more important than knowledge. And another thing I'll say to tee this up is, nobody out there, at least my best assumption is that nobody out there is trying to lose money or trying to put their family in a worse position. Everybody's personal financial picture is just the best that they know how to do. And I think we can absolutely believe the best in everybody. I know for me, I was doing the best I could until I discovered IBC, and I discovered there's something so much better out there. So, when Albert Einstein perhaps is talking about knowledge, he's talking about the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
Like Galileo could have just been content with, believing, okay, the Earth is the center of the universe. And knowledge is in part to be discovered to be either false or improved upon. And that's where imagination just opens those doors in your mind to think, could I replace the bank in my own life? Could I, when Galileo's thinking about that, or anybody throughout history who have imagined a better circumstance or a better solution to a problem. I think that absolutely speaks to, and especially for me, once I discovered one thing that was unconventional, in my personal financial life, that unlocked in my mind the opportunity to start learning more and more niche per se or unconventional strategies. And that's where IBC kind of came into the mix for me, is I was essentially primed for that because my imagination was already starting to work and the gears were turning to think that there is something better than the status quo or the knowledge that I had. So I think that quote is absolutely telling when it comes to just understanding there's something better or potentially something better out there.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Rob, what are your thoughts on imagination?
Yeah, and I'd say like maybe a concrete example. There might be, a listener out there that's wondering, well, how could I, money is tight. I don't have much extra,
Mm-hmm.
to put in a policy. Well, one of the kind of epiphany moments that I had, because I already had my policy going, paying high premium into it, but once you start to realize that, making premium deposits into your bank, you want to keep doing it and you want to put more into it because you see how that cash value grows and how you can leverage it. And so it stops. It's not a payment, it's a deposit. And then I think for most of us, when you get your first policy and you're paying pretty much all of your see, the thing is, you're putting all of your money into it, but you can just take it right back out again. I think that's a key that people don't realize. When you pay your premium deposit monthly or annually, you can use it. It's not like gone. You can keep, and I think people don't make that mental connection that when you pay it, you can just leverage it back out again for something if you need to. But then once you get your first one going, and you were, now you're like, well, how do I find more income to put in it? We could save. That's an option. You could think, imagine, how can we save more? That's one place of imagine. But one that really lit a light bulb for me was all this money that is going through my hands, property taxes, annual taxes, homeowners insurance, tithing. This is all cash that comes into my account, then goes through my hands and goes to a thing. That's a lot of money per year that was just flowing through without going first into a policy. And that's like, that's more, that amount of money right there is more than I'm paying annually today. Now, and we're paying a lot, and it's more than I'm paying annually today. So that's like imagination, and little things like that, you start to think differently. And to me, that's like a concrete example of how imagination can work, and how you, and so all that money, it's the same amount of money you're spending anyway. Just sequence it through your policy first, pay it out, and then you're saving up. You're saving up for your taxes, you're saving up for your insurance, you're saving up for your tithing, you're saving up. You're going to pay that anyway. So you just fill up your IBC tank, and then you pay it out, and then you fill it back up, and then while you're doing that, it's continually growing, and then that's when the magic really kicks in. You're like, wow, this is really going to change the financial trajectory of my family.
Yeah, Rob, as you're talking, I was actually thinking about another piece of imagination that I wasn't considering beforehand. But imagine if you want to start an infinite banking policy, but you're uninsurable. That doesn't mean you can't. It just means you're not the right proposed insured person on the contract. You may have other people that you have an insurable interest in. Consider, for example, a grandparent who's maybe in retirement, 70 years old.
Mm-hmm.
The cost of insurance on that person is probably not going to be economical to start a policy for them, but they can start a policy for their kids or their grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
Just that shift in thinking. Imagine what, I may not be able to fund a policy with myself being proposed insured, but I can still own and control the contract. I can still pay the premiums, access it via policy loans, as Rob was talking about. All I'm doing is just shifting it and saying, okay, I may not be healthy enough, or I may be not young enough in order to have a whole life insurance contract, but I could shift that, and I could have somebody else that I love and care about be the proposed insured.
Yeah, I even heard of someone who owns an apartment with how many doors, I'm not sure, but every single tenant is an insurable interest for that owner. So he got policies on all of the tenants. He gave them a deal on their rent if they would sign some kind of longer term agreement, and then they're all insurable interests. And so he's building up equity in every tenant in his building. That's brilliant. That is imagination.
Yeah, that is imagination. Or I'll give you another example. You're a pastor of a church or an elder of a church, and you've got somebody who's been faithfully giving and tithing to your church for, let's say, 10 plus years. Maybe they're a big donor that would substantially affect the church's finances if that person were to pass away. Well, you can get, as a church, a nonprofit organization, you can get a life insurance policy on a member of your church, especially those who may be high donors. I thought that was a neat little trick too. But yeah, I mean, you could do this as a church, you could do it as a corporation, a small business, a family business. You could insure people that work for you, that you would want to keep working for you if you had a key employee. There's a lots of different ways of just shifting who the proposed insured is, but thinking big picture imagination as to how you can capitalize a system like this that you own control. It's just somebody else's life.
Yeah,
that absolutely just speaks to the concept itself, infinite banking concept.
Right.
We're only limited by ourselves. We're only limited by our imagination. That absolutely, just talking about the church, like that's a really cool idea, and propels the good that the church is probably doing in the community with their members. And there's just so many opportunities that this can be applied to.
Yeah,
know,
the reason and logic comes in because, the church, where are they storing their funds? It's probably in a bank account or maybe a CD. It's not likely that they're at least putting a large portion into a mutual fund or something like that where they want to risk it. They're probably choosing a safer vehicle.
yeah,
Well, here's one that would perform better than a savings account, CD, money market account. It comes with a large cash infusion if that donor were to pass away, and all of a sudden now you're buffering the life of your church, the finances of your church, just by changing and starting a policy on somebody who might be a substantial donor.
yeah. I don't think churches recognize the power of whole life for benefiting the church.
Yeah.
They're just like everybody else. Like I was, they keep thinking of traditional financing models. Churches could totally, wow, could they take advantage of whole life policies to be the bedrock foundation of the church finances,
Yeah.
and a legacy that, another IBC practitioner, which all of us are authorized IBC practitioners through the Nelson Nash Institute. He talked about, churches are tax-free entities, I believe. And so he was theorizing that churches wouldn't have MEC limits. So churches could MEC and it wouldn't negatively affect them. And so I was like, man, I got to look into that a little bit more, because that could be a really powerful tool. If that's true,
Yeah.
if churches are not being taxed, then they wouldn't be negatively affected by a MEC, a modified endowment contract, or a policy that became a MEC, that became a modified endowment contract. So I think there's just a huge opportunity for churches to take advantage of dividend paying, mutually owned life insurance policies, to become the bedrock.
And that would go for any tax exempt organization. It's not just churches, but any nonprofit, anything that's tax exempt. Mm-hmm. And modified endowment contract. One reason why we don't strive for that is because for personal individuals and their families, if your contract were to become a modified endowment contract, now it's a taxable account and it loses the preferential tax treatment. But what Rob is saying is, because they already have a preferential tax treatment, we can MEC the contract, which means simply that they're going to have access to more cash value sooner,
right?
Because they are already tax exempt. Whereas at the you and me level, we have to pay our taxes. We can't get out of that quite yet.
Yeah. And one of the challenges then about proposing, real quick, John, sorry, but proposing ideas like this is then you run into the barrier of standard, kind of financial planning. And it's just different than what everybody, it's such a, people that aren't aware of it. And so it hits these roadblocks where they just shut it off completely because they don't want to go down that road, because it's what they're not used to. They haven't changed the way they think yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the only thing I was going to add is just a church kind of in the right form functions as a family. They're a tight-knit group, and similar to the way I desire to have a family bank established for generations to come, so can these churches. So I think that's just a really interesting concept that we're exploring right now, and that our imaginations are getting more and more broad and able to just see things that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to even imagine. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I suppose then just a plug, if you happen to be, a member of a church in the leadership group, and this is something you want to explore this idea more, reach out to us. I just think it's it's an underutilized tool that I don't think, just like regular, folks aren't aware of, churches aren't aware of how they can leverage whole life policies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we already said, even small businesses is kind of a market that people aren't necessarily considering what they're doing with their short-term cash flow. And this is a way to protect that cash, grow it better than you would in some other savings vehicles. Yep. But guys, I was on the phone today with a potential client, and he was talking about, do I have my trust own the policy, or do I just list my trust as a beneficiary of the policy? And as we were having the conversation, imagining, in my own personal situation, what I would do if I were to pass away and listed a trust as the beneficiary. And I said, well, you can control how that death benefit is being saved or invested or to purchase additional insurance while you're still living. You can set those parameters. And one thing that I thought would be really neat for my family is, because I want to encourage stewardship and I want to encourage hard work and creating value for people, I could write in the trust documents that my beneficiary, my heirs, let's say my daughter, my son, could not take out a policy loan until they had started their own business and generated X amount in revenue. And the sole reason for that is because I want my kids to know the value of hard work, the value that they can create something and make it perform well and be successful at something, even though it might only be $5,000 or $10,000 worth of revenue. I just want them to get that little bit of taste of what it's like to be an entrepreneur before they had potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash value accessible to them in that death benefit. What are you guys' takes on that? Future planning when it comes to trusts or legacy? How can we use imagination in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, that's what was the tipping point for me. That's where I saw multiple generations to come, and the values that I have, the faith-based principles that I have, and all the things that I desire for my kids and their kids to embrace. I now see as a tangible reality that, though money is not going to solve everything, it can certainly fund good things that, like you're talking about in a trust, you can establish those values. You can establish, even a percentage of giving that's going to be required through this. And, most of these families who understand the legacy planning and the Rockefellers, even, they are very, very generous. They establish organizations that reach far beyond what an individual giver would ever be able to accomplish. So, that's where the imagination and my mind and my understanding of IBC really took off, to just see this multiple generations down the road. And I'm not a very emotional guy, and I was broken down to tears reading this book. So it was, just a really fun thought exercise in that end.
Rob, what about when it comes to imagining how to fund a policy? What are some potential ways of solving a problem as to how to fund the policy? What can people imagine for themselves?
Well, I guess, the first obvious one is I'm assuming people are already saving money on this, in some sense on the side for a rainy day. They're trying to create an emergency fund. And so the first obvious spot is, take those funds that you're putting into your savings account. And that's what life insurance is. It's basically a supercharged savings account that gives you all these extra benefits. It's, when I run a policy illustration through, a funding calculator, a truth concepts calculator, and you take into account the internal rate of return of the policy. You take into account the taxes that you're not paying on the growth. You take into account any management fees that you don't have. It starts getting up. The interest rates they're higher than CDs. And so just imagine that you have a savings vehicle that has CD rates, that has all the benefit and control. So all that money you're basically sticking in a bank account for a rainy day, just shift that into a policy. So you get the equivalent or better rates of return, plus you get all of that exponential growth, and you get all the control. You get no 1099s, it's private. And then you get the death benefit, so it's just, and so that's the first step, where are you saving your money already? And then, what I mentioned before is all the things that you pay for annually that you have to save up for, like property taxes, insurance, tithing. those kind of things. Like that's money you pay every year annually. Take that block of money and roll, sequence that through your policy, and then take it out as policy loans to do those things you're going to pay for anyway.
Mm-hmm.
To me, those are like the two things to look at. Potential windfalls. So if you're going to sell a property, you have to put that cash somewhere. With the policies that we design, you can front load it, so that gives you a place to put that cash, and then you can have smaller premiums then for the following years. So there's a lot of ways that you can do this that people just aren't aware of. That's what we were here to do is help coach people through how they can start the policies for themselves and create their own family bank.
Yeah, maybe another example of that would be I was working with a guy who was considering withdrawing some money out of his IRA and to fund a large premium amount in the first year of the insurance contract. That's an example of a way to fund a policy. Another great example would be for those of you who maybe own an annuity, that annual payment that you're receiving. Let's say you don't need the full amount. Maybe you're not spending that much in retirement and you'd rather divert it, put it in a great savings account, a savings vehicle that performs better than bonds. Or you are a retiree and you've got a traditional 60% equity allocation and a 40% bond allocation, or whatever allocation it is to bonds. There's a lot of studies that have been coming out in recent years that talk about how life insurance is a great alternative to your bond portfolio. And the cherry on top is it comes with a death benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another great example. If you received an inheritance, maybe you had a loved one who had a life insurance policy. Okay, well, that windfall is a great way to begin funding a system on yourself and on the people that you care most about. Go ahead, Rob.
Another really good one too is, we've all been basically the moment you get a job, they automatically enroll you in a 401k. So you've been putting all your money into a 401k, you've been maxing that out. But you don't know what the interest rates are going to be at that point when you start withdrawing it. You don't know where the market's going to be at that point when you start withdrawing it. So a super smart hedge is, consider if you already have a good nest egg in your 401k, consider diverting some of those funds into a life insurance policy, because then that creates this hedge so that you can take out, if the market's down, you take money out of your life insurance policy. When the market's up, you take money out of your 401k. So you're never forced to take money out of your 401k when the market's low. So that's why a life insurance policy, that cash value, is such an important hedge that can really supercharge the 401k, so you never get hit with the lows when you're taking your withdrawals.
Yeah. So
that's, I think, a super smart spot to consider as well.
Yeah. Another way of just imagining, you can, one of the companies that we're affiliated with, I was doing some research on today, and they allow for not only convertible term inside their own company, but let's say you had a convertible term policy from company XYZ, you could convert that into a whole life policy for company ABC. I didn't realize that they would carry that, they would honor that convertible term from a different company that wrote that contract, that term policy. They would honor it and allow you to convert it into a whole life policy from company ABC.
Wow, I did not know that. When did you learn that?
Today.
Wow, are you serious?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, there's a list of about 50 companies that they'll accept as long as it's still within the convertibility period.
I was gonna say they probably should vet the screening process if they're gonna receive it from a different company, but 50 companies, that's a pretty broad net there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and I mean, it's all good companies that have been in the insurance industry for quite some time, but yeah, I thought that was an interesting trick. I didn't realize that they would accept a term policy, convertible term, still has to be convertible, but they would accept it even though it was under a different insurance company.
That's really cool. I didn't realize that. I guess you didn't either till today, but
yeah.
So I have a convertible term policy on my wife with one of the other big insurance, IBC companies that we work with. but we have a company we prefer to work with. And so I always just assumed I would just convert it into a whole life policy with that other insurance company.
Yeah.
I said, sweet.
Yeah.
I can convert it into the one we primarily work with. That's
another
awesome.
great example is a little trick called a 1035 exchange.
Yep.
I was working with a family member who owns a variable universal life policy, which is not built as efficiently as a whole life policy for the purposes of the infinite banking concept. We can go on and on about why it's not the right vehicle, but you can do a swap, an exchange. You maybe own an index universal life or a variable universal life. You can exchange that into a whole life insurance policy, which is more designed and akin to what Nelson would teach here in the book on Becoming Your Own Banker. So that's just another way of just changing your thinking, using your imagination. How can I solve a problem? Well, this is a great way to begin a new system just by shifting those premiums that you were paying already in life insurance in the wrong type of contract. We can exchange that for a contract that's more akin, more specialized, more designed for IBC.
That's great.
All right, guys. Well, any other thoughts about imagination, reason, logic, and prophecy?
I think when we shifted towards imagination, we talked in a zoomed out perspective, what are the possibilities out there? And as y'all can tell, if you're listening, we are IBC life insurance, even kind of nerds, and we enjoy this stuff. So we got to zoom in and give you a little sneak peek of what even the products and rates and numbers that we're talking about. And we can talk about that all day if you want, and feel free to reach out. But zooming back out, another kind of last thought I had when it comes to imagination that really resonates with me and in the family aspect of it is just imagine just the peace and like the freedom in your relationships that you can have in, say, your marriage or with your say in-laws or your parents or whoever else it may be. Money can add stress. And I think we all know that, many marriages out there can struggle, because money is not handled well. And so just if you are going through that, just imagine that, there is a better alternative out there that can not only give you today peace, but hope, for the future. And for many generations after that. So zooming back out, I just think that's just a really special aspect of IBC that can really serve families every day.
Yep. Yeah, and I think to add on to that, the key component of that hope you get with whole life insurance policies is the guarantees, right? It's a contract. It's guaranteed to go up every single day. Where if you're putting your money in the market like that, I have my money in the market. You never know what it's going to do. And it seems like the moment you need it, the market's down. It's just, I just love breaking free from that system. That freedom, that peace of mind, it really is it's a total switch in kind of like your financial, emotional condition.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to say thank you to both of you gentlemen. And before we sign off, I want to say thank you to our listeners. The overwhelming support and generosity, the views that have come in as we've started this channel. I just want to say thank you to our listeners and consider subscribing, following, sharing this with your family members. If you're interested in getting in contact with us, there'll be details in the show notes below. But until then, we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you for joining us. If you're interested in a conversation about anything we've discussed, you can find our contact information in the show notes below.
And subscribe, follow, and leave a review to help spread this message and to help families across the country discover the generational blessing of IBC. May God bless you, and we'll see you next time.